Breaking news, corals are being bleached all over the world. Reefs are heating up and the corals are stressed. There's huge excess of carbon in our waterways, the hydrosphere, and in the air, our atmosphere. But why is this happening? Now I'll send it over to Maggie and Quinn.
There's an excess amount of carbon and it's a serious problem. Before we understand the full issue, we need to understand how carbon flows through the four spheres. Carbon naturally transfers between the biosphere and atmosphere through photosynthesis and cellular respiration.
Photosynthesis occurs when plants or algae take in CO2, H2O, and sunlight and turn it into C6H12O6, which is unusable for humans in the biosphere. When it's in this form, it's glucose and used for protein and DNA.
Photosynthesis sends CO2 from the atmosphere to the biosphere. Carbon also flows from the biosphere to the atmosphere through the process of cellular respiration. This happens when living organisms burn energy and it ends up back as unusable CO2. Cellular respiration moves carbon from the biosphere to the air and the water. Natural forest fires also move carbon from the biosphere back to the atmosphere. I'll send it back to Kira to explain more of the carbon cycle.
Thanks, Maggie and Quinn. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are always present throughout the carbon cycle. In fact, they are opposing reactions that move carbon in opposite directions. Carbon also cannot be created or destroyed, which means it must follow a cycle. Carbon moves out of the biosphere to all of the other spheres throughout the process of decomposition. Naturally, forest fires can move carbon from the biosphere to the atmosphere as well.
Another natural process of the carbon cycle is diffusion. Gas particles are always moving. Carbon molecules move back and forth from the atmosphere and hydrosphere. CO2 enters the ocean by diffusing into the sea surfaces, and molecules diffuse back into the air.
Carbon also moves out of the biosphere in the slowest process in the carbon cycle, known as fossil fuel formation. This process takes 350 million years and is occurring at a slow rate. Fossil fuel is now stored in the geosphere under a bunch of sediment. Also, 350 years ago, plankton sank to the bottom of the ocean. Now I'm sending this over to Maggie to explore how combustion affects the world.
At a power station. This is one location where fossil fuels are burned. After natural gases are burned, they release large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Combustion of fossil fuels is happening at a very fast rate. Humans are affecting the carbon cycle because we are taking fossil fuels that have been underground and now burning them for energy. This process puts an excess amount of carbon into the atmosphere. The rate that the fossil fuel is actually being created happens very slowly, which is what Kira was talking about with fossil fuel formation. The natural way for carbon to get from the geosphere to the atmosphere is through volcanic activity. But because of combustion, it's happening at a faster rate. Now sending it over to Quinn to explain the issues caused by deforestation.
I'm here live at a dead forest. Humans have cut down all of these trees. Because of deforestation, these trees can no longer absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Because of this, more carbon stays in the atmosphere and can diffuse into the hydrosphere. Forest fires have also increased over recent years, which puts more carbon in the atmosphere. As we can see, deforestation needs to be stopped, so the carbon cycle can continue as expected through photosynthesis. Now sending it to Kira to show why we should be encouraging reforestation.
I'm here in a newly planted forest. We need to continue to plant trees to cut carbon emissions. Trees absorb CO2 from the air through the process of photosynthesis. Less CO2 will be in the atmosphere and less will get into the oceans if trees perform photosynthesis. In order to keep carbon on its correct cycle, we must encourage reforestation. Back to Quinn, who will show lab data that was found to prove how photosynthesis can't occur properly without reforestation.
I'm at Barrington High School where we allowed us to perform that shows how deforestation is affecting our Earth. In this lab experiment, the foil is representing deforestation, and the spinach is representing the forest. When deforestation occurs, the light has no access to the spinach. This essentially is preventing CO2 from being absorbed into the atmosphere from the biosphere. When we remove the issue of deforestation, the cycle will continue the process of photosynthesis.
In our lab data, you can see here that CO2 is decreased once the foil, deforestation, is removed and photosynthesis can occur. This is a good thing because we want CO2 to leave the atmosphere because of all the combustion that's occurring. Back to the desk to wrap up today's episode of the Carbon Cycle.
In the natural carbon cycle, where humans aren't burning fossil fuels, there is an excess amount of carbon getting into the atmosphere. Through combustion, more forest fires, and deforestation, tons of excess carbon is getting into the atmosphere.
This is why it's important we look into reforestation and planting more trees. We need to take the carbon out of the atmosphere using photosynthesis so excess carbon doesn't stay in the atmosphere and hydrosphere. Hope you enjoyed today's episode on the carbon cycle. Get outside and start planting.